Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsome with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Now, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Now at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll to the far side. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown! They are going to play for the left hand. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you as always. And tonight, it is time to get into the running backs here on the 2026 roster for the Tar Heels as we get you ready for the upcoming season. And this is one of those groups that coming off of last year, I think a lot of people probably feel decent about, but we're going to dive into the room as a whole and tell you who we think can make impacts this season, what we think the depth chart is ultimately going to look like this year, and a ton of other stuff here on tonight's edition of the podcast. So let's just jump right into it. We don't have any other news to really get to here. There might be some on some of the other editions that we do this, but tonight, just getting straight into it. And when you look at this running back room, I think coming off of a year ago, it is in a confusing spot because I feel like for the most part, a lot of people felt pretty decent about what you saw at times from the running back unit a year ago. But, you know, there were some games where they didn't necessarily produce. I think a lot of people are putting that on the offensive line, but I still don't know if people believe that Damon June, based off of some of the stuff that I've seen this offseason, if they believe that Damon June is the guy in this room, if they believe that he is the guy that can really carry Carolina's backfield this upcoming season. I've seen some talk. A lot of people really excited, of course, about Caleb Jackson coming in, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. Also, some people that believe that Benjamin Hall going to have to be much more involved this time around for Carolina in the backfield. But what do you think about that notion that some people are putting out there that Damon June, really a solid back, but maybe not one that's able to carry this backfield this upcoming season for Carolina?
I think it's unfair to put that on him just because he was never really given the chance to be a number one back on a week in, week out basis once he established himself as the best running back on Carolina's roster a year ago. That was as confusing as anything we experienced last year as Carolina fans, watching this offense struggle on a week in, week out basis to just move the ball up and down the field, was just the fact that there were some games he did not get the football nowhere near as much as he should have. It would be deep into the second half before he was getting his double-digit touch of the game, it would feel like. And it just never really made a whole lot of sense because I thought of all the running backs that Carolina cycled through a year ago, he maximized his opportunities as much as anybody. You know, ran the ball 84 times for north of 460 yards, and people are going to see only 2 rushing touchdowns. And, well, how could that guy be your lead back? Well, it was just one of those things that didn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, it felt like every game we came out of the game, saying he should have touched the football more and should have been given more of an opportunity to be the lead runner. But I'll just kind of reiterate what I said about this unit coming out of the spring. The big thing I worry about with this running back room is there an explosive runner that can emerge and really just create some home run plays for this offense? I trust that Damon June can be a guy that if Bobby Petrino runs 20, 25 times, will be able to wear defenses down and be able to finish runs deep into the second half of ball games. And we need that. You also got to be able to generate some easy yards on your ground game. And I don't know, with Tara Dickens no longer enrolling at the quarterback spot, if the RPOs can be a big part of what Carolina does. I don't know how much of the running aspect will be involved with the quarterback, depending on who emerges as your starter. And so I look at Damon June and I trust what he can do, but I don't know if there's an explosive runner in that backfield to make some home run plays. And that's probably another big question I have about this run game as we get closer and closer to the start of fall camp.
Yeah, no doubt that's the biggest question, I think, when it comes to this room, is who is going to create those explosive plays consistently. And I don't know that you have that guy. I think part of that is that you're going to have to probably figure out, what your offensive line is going to be able to do this year up front before you can really determine how explosive this room is going to be. Because I think that was one of the issues a year ago was, that this group certainly had its faults in terms of the lack of speed that they had in certain areas. But at the same time, I thought the offensive line just did a terrible job as the season went along. And now part of it was, there was a lot of pressure on the interior of the offensive line because it seemed like every run play was run either in the A or B gap. That was where Carolina thought that they were going to have the most success. There was no sort of creativity to be able to get the ball out to the edge. We're hearing that, from Andrew Jones when he was on with us, they're becoming much more creative in the run game in terms of them trying to get the ball in the hands of some of the wide receivers. Trek Kekauna, who we'll talk more about when we do the wide receiver position preview, is a guy that they're looking at to use on some jet sweeps. I would assume that if you are going to have someone like Madrid Tucker, even CJ Sadler, the true freshman at wide receiver, maybe that's ultimately, another guy that you try to get the ball in their hands with some of the jet sweep type of stuff, which Carolina didn't seem like they utilized enough last year. But the other thing is you got to just be able to have confidence in your running backs that you're going to be able to run on the edges and succeed in that area. And so, there's some guys in this room that I think have shown that ability at the high school level. Does it translate to the college level, or are they guys that have just become so hell-bent on running in between the A and B gaps? I think that's going to be interesting to talk about. But when it comes to Damon June, I think what he was able to do as a freshman, while not having much help in that room, and as you said, really at certain times during the year, just for some reason not getting the ball enough. There were games where other teams where other running backs really were able to, find carries that I didn't think they deserved. A lot of the times it was a guy like Benjamin Hall, who, no offense to him, wasn't really great in terms of carrying the football a year ago and the success that he had. Now, this year, Carolina is going to need him to be much more successful, but I thought there were a lot of points last year where he shouldn't have been carrying the ball, especially down the stretch of the season. And yet, for some reason, he was the guy that Carolina was turning to. This year, hopefully, there will be more of an understanding of, if a guy is hot, let's ride the hot hand and let's find a way to give that guy more carries. I think that's something that we just didn't see a lot of last year, whether it was with him or if it was with Davian Goss. That was another guy that it was just confusing, the usage rate of him when he was having so much success. There's a reason he's now at NC State. And that's going to be a tough pill to swallow if he ends up succeeding there for Carolina. But I think Damon June is capable of carrying this backfield. You look last year, just 84 carries, which is hard to believe with the success that he had for 464 yards and 2 touchdowns. The middle number, of course, which led Carolina a year ago, caught 17 passes for 159 yards and a touchdown out of the backfield. So definitely shows the ability to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield and succeed in that area. That's something that Carolina really needs in their backfield as well. I really like Damon June. I think if he's in the right system, he's going to be a guy that could rush for over 1,000 yards. I think there's still going to probably be a little too much rotation this year at the running back spot for him to reach that number. But I feel pretty confident that he's the guy that's going to be leading Carolina in this backfield this upcoming season once again, because I think especially if the offensive line blocks better, you'll see some of those explosive plays, even if it's through the middle of defenses where he usually succeeds.
Yeah, I don't doubt or I don't question Damon June's ability to be a lead back. You're talking about a guy that you mentioned, 464 rushing yards on just 84 attempts. That averaged out to over 5 yards a carry. Like that'll play. That's something which is why we would come on here and gripe and complain when he would have those games where he wasn't touching the ball 20 to 25 times. And look, the running back position has evolved where you're no longer running your guy into the ground like you would, running him 30, 35 times. I get that there's going to be a balance and there's going to be there's going to be split carries, but it needs to be evenly distributed or distributed in a way that just makes sense within the flow of the offense. And that was something that it never felt like, Freddie Kitchens had last year. And to be frank, we don't know how much of that was Freddie Kitchens, how much of that was Bill Belichick saying, hey, this is what I want to do to evaluate every guy on this roster. We'll never know that answer unless Freddie Kitchens were to out Bill Belichick later on down the road. It feels like with an experienced offensive coordinator, a respected offensive coordinator like Bobby Petrino, that stuff's not going to happen. Like it feels like he'll be, I'm not going to say man enough, but he'll have the gumption to stand up to Bill. If Bill wants him to do something he doesn't feel like is what's best for his offense. And so I'm really excited for what Damon June's role is going to be in this offense, because I do think he could be a guy that, may not garner a whole lot of attention as we get ready for ACC kickoff here in a couple weeks. But maybe by the time we get to the ACC championship game, he's getting, all ACC consideration for what he can do in that backfield. I don't think I'm speaking out of line saying that. It's just what does the rest of the room behind him have to offer is one thing that I do have a question about. But I feel a lot more comfortable tackling those questions, trying to find those answers with the guy like Bobby Petrino running this offense, as opposed to what we experienced last year with Freddie Kitchens.
Yeah, I have no worries about Bobby Petrino riding with a hot hand if he gets it at running back. I think you can see already, just judging off of some of the notes that have come out of spring practice, there's much more control for Bobby Petrino in this offense than there was for Freddie Kitchens. Now, I mean, look, part of it might be that Freddie Kitchens just wasn't nearly as vocal with it and that he really did control a lot of those areas. I will tell you, it is in the best interest that that was what happened last year with Carolina, that yes, this was Freddie Kitchens who just massively swung and missed. Because if it's Bill Belichick being that involved, and it's a lot of it is on Bill Belichick, well, then Carolina's in trouble. And I would hope that that's not where Carolina's at. Now, it could be one of those things where Bill realized after last year, hey, I need to turn it over to a guy that has much more experience at the college level. I need to step out of the way and let him really run his offense. But I'm hoping that it's more of that Freddie Kitchens just wasn't nearly as inventive. We talked about that a lot throughout the year. That it was a guy that just never adjusted to what he had, and there never really seemed to be any sort of creativity to try to do something different for Carolina. It seemed like they were going to continue to try to run the same principles, the same very simplistic playbook into the ground, and it didn't necessarily work. Now, when you look at the rest of this running back room, that you said that you're a little worried about the guys behind them, and I think that really is justified. I think there's a lot to like in this room on paper, I think there's guys that you look at and you say, yeah, in theory, these guys could be pretty good this upcoming season. But there's other stuff that you look at throughout their careers and through the time that they played, if they were on the roster last year in the case of Benjamin Hall and Jalen McGill, and you just don't see the production that you need to see. Now, I mean, look, when it comes to Benjamin Hall, I think that's the guy that everybody expects is going to be a part of the rotation again this year. That's a holdover. Played 168 snaps last year for Carolina and ran for 274 yards and 2 touchdowns, 71 carries, and also had 8 catches for 34 yards last season. So not a guy that really caught the ball well out of the backfield. That's certainly something that could limit him from being a big part of what Carolina does in the backfield this season, especially if they're going to use Damon June on those early downs to sort of wear defenses down. But you're looking for probably a similar role again this year for Benjamin Hall, to what you're hearing from a guy like Damon June, where he's going to be a guy that's going to come in and you're hoping is going to wear people down by running through those A and B gaps. In high school, there was some speed there. There was the ability to get to the edge and be able to make plays out in space. You just don't really see that at this level. And I mean, look, judging off of the size that he brings, I would assume that he's going to be someone that Carolina is going to continue to run in between the tackles and look to get the type of production that they got last year in the game against Cal, where he really played well. But that was really the one game that stuck out to me. And it's why I have so many questions about him coming into this season, about just how effective he's going to be in that backfield for Carolina. Because if he's the number 2 back, I will say I am a little bit concerned going into the season.
Yeah, I would like to see if there's a legitimate camp battle for that number 2 spot, or has he kind of solidified himself there behind Damon June as Carolina's number 2 runner? I mean, we've said this whenever we've had the conversation around Benjamin Hall. You don't end up at Michigan as a running back by accident. Like, there had to be something there to lead you to a program that recruits running backs at a high level, produces running backs at a high level, and values that position as much as any in modern college football. With that being said, the guy that got that got recruited by the Wolverines, we have not really seen that guy during his time in Chapel Hill. And we, this, I don't know if this was just a clear misevaluation of what he was coming out of high school, if it speaks volumes about how poor the offensive line play he has, at Carolina as opposed to Michigan. I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you that I don't know if he's as productive as a number 2 running back as I'd like to have going into the season. Like, I think I'd feel a lot better about this spot if the numbers were a little bit better than they were a year ago, where he, 168 snaps, 274 on the ground, or 168 snaps total, 71 carries, 274 on the ground. But we also got to take last year kind of with a grain of salt, because you had a limited quarterback, you had a limited play caller, et cetera, et cetera. With that being said, I think he stands to benefit from Bobby Petrino, but if not, like, there needs to be a short leash with this guy. Like, if there's not production there, and I'm talking immediately, like, if we come out of the TCU game and it's just not there, they need to be prepared to turn to Caleb Jackson, Jalen McGill, all the other guys on the roster, and just see if they can find someone else behind Damon June to help split the carries, because I find the value in having a 2-back system, and I think that's what Bobby Petrino wants it to be. But we don't need to run Benjamin Hall out there like we did last year if there is a production there to back up the playing time.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. I think, last year it felt like at times they were really trying to force him, and maybe it was just a guy that they felt coming from Michigan, as you said, it was eventually going to unlock itself for him, and all of a sudden he was going to turn into the back that he was at the high school level. I don't know if that's there. I mean, you go back to his time at Michigan, and I mean, this was a guy that, in his first year when Michigan ends up winning the national title, is on the field in garbage time in 3 games and has an average of 4.6 yards per carry, which was solid. But really, since then, I mean, he played much more important snaps in the 8 games that he played in 2024. He averaged 2.5 yards a carry. Last year, just 3.9 yards per carry. You would like to see that number be a lot better on the ground for Carolina. And so hopefully, that's something that happens this year. Maybe you just need to light a fire under his rear end, where last year wasn't necessarily the year that he was wanting. I don't know, if Davian Goss fell sort of out of favor with the coaching staff. I don't know what happened, but I don't think we're going to experience the same thing with Caleb Jackson. So maybe there's more pressure on him this year where, hey, if you don't step up, then yeah, we're going to go to a guy like Caleb Jackson. You have another year under the belt, coming out of the high school ranks for Jalen McGill, who was an early enrollee. He came in as a 17-year-old. Now he's 18. Maybe he's a guy that adjusts to the college level a lot better this year. And even some of the other guys a little bit deeper on the roster. You never know who could ultimately become a piece of this backfield. But I think there is going to be more pressure on him. It's just, can you meet the challenge? That's what we're hoping for. Because if you do, if you come out and you're productive, then we're going to be behind you. We're going to say, hey, you should be getting snaps on the field. That was the thing. After the game against California, we both kind of looked at him and said, hey, if this guy continues to play this way, then yeah, there is a reason to be able to play him out there. But you never really saw that after that. They continued to still try to run him. And I thought there were moments where you could have just gone to other guys instead of putting him out there on the field, putting him in a position where he wasn't going to necessarily be successful. And so hopefully that's something that Carolina does a good job of adjusting to this year. If they feel, as you said, that out of the gate, things just aren't going as well as it probably should, then yeah, hopefully they do, have, they are smart enough to say, let's turn to Caleb Jackson, who I think is going to be the guy that's going to battle him. And I got to be honest, I think there's a good chance Caleb Jackson beats him out based off of everything that we've heard about Caleb Jackson. And this was one of those guys that Andrew Jones talked about when we had him on as one of the guys that really stood out in the spring. He was someone that was apparently really standing out in the weight room back in the winter. Then it translated onto the field in the spring. It's hard to say that he was one of the main standouts, that he had a huge spring or anything like that, because they, didn't really get a look at him in team drills or anything like that, the media at least. But at the same time, when you're hearing his name pop up just about every time you talk about the backfield, really the one name that's popping up every time that you talk about the backfield, it starts to have you feel like this is a guy that is going to potentially make some sort of effect this year. Transfers in from LSU, where he never really saw as much action as he probably hoped to. A little bit more action than some of the guys that, we've seen transfer into the backfield, even a little bit more than what we saw when Benjamin Hall transferred in last year. Because, he was a guy that as a freshman was on the field, 31 carries, 165 yards, 4 touchdowns. Then as a sophomore, 44 carries, 150 yards. So you saw that yards per carry drop significantly. And then last year, just 7 carries, played in just 4 games, when the previous 2 years he had played in all 13 games those seasons. Just played in 4 games last year. 7 carries, 16 yards. So, I mean, yeah, this is another guy where there are some expectations coming in, because it seems like he's shining for Carolina on the field and in the weight room. But at the same time, there is a little bit of concern with the fact that he was never able to really become a part of the rotation at LSU. And if Carolina is expecting him to come in and be great, that might be asking just a little bit too much.
Well, I think if you're asking him to be great, you're asking too much out of him. This was a guy that, in an ideal world, if we had a spring game, would have been really intrigued to see just what does he look like in Carolina blue? What kind of runner, could he be? How is Bobby Petrino going to use him? Because I have more belief in him having a bigger role than I have in Benjamin Hall. Like, that's why I'd like to think that there's a legitimate battle for that number 2 spot entering fall camp. And I'd like to think by whatever point in time of the year, Carolina has figured some stuff out offensively. I would like to think that Caleb Jackson is the number 2 running back on this, on this roster behind Damon June. And he's the guy that is splitting times. He's splitting time with June in that backfield. You mentioned what he was able to do as a freshman. Roughly just over 30 carries, $165, 4 touchdowns for his career, just over 80 carries, over 330 yards. Has some receiving out of the backfield ability, which might help him kind of get onto the field maybe in third down situations, maybe as a whether it's as a pass blocker first and then a pass receiver second. I do think that's a component of this offense that needs to be identified. They need someone that can come out of the backfield and catch the football. I don't know if that's necessarily Damon June or Benjamin Hall's strength, but look, there's a physicality to his running style that I think it's easy to appreciate. When you go back and if you watch his highlights, you'll find the ability to finish runs, run through tackles. There is some explosiveness to his game that I talked about this offense desperately needing in the running game. So I'm interested to hear and see kind of how much he gets talked about from the coaching staff in the fall. And then when we're getting the intel updates from the Andrew Jones of the world, from the Inside Carolinas, how much are they writing about him as we're getting ready for TCU? And I think the more that you see his name potentially written in an article or come up in a podcast is a good thing, because I believe more in his high-end ability as opposed to Benjamin Hall. But it's going to be up to him to make his way up the depth chart. It's going to be up to him to carve out a role, and I'm excited to see exactly what that could potentially look like.
Yeah, it feels like his potential is much higher, in my opinion, based off of the fact that he is the guy that when we asked Andrew Jones who in this backfield could be the explosive player for Carolina, he said Caleb Jackson. That's the guy that he pointed to. And yes, he's a guy that's going to finish runs physically. That, I think, at this point is a given when it comes to this offense and what Carolina is ultimately looking for when they're bringing in running backs in this backfield. They are going to all be able to finish runs by lowering their shoulder. He's a heavier back as well. So, is that explosion really there? I think is going to be interesting. But he's 6 foot, 234 pounds. So if the explosion is there, then you've got a really special type of running back for Carolina. You're going to have a pretty complete back that can do a lot of things for you. That would be a gift for Carolina if they can get that out of him. Again, this is another one of those situations where LSU is known for having some of the better running backs in the country year in and year out. So there's a reason why he ended up at LSU. Is he able to show that? Is Carolina's staff really able to unlock that? I think that's going to be the biggest question for Carolina this season. Can they unlock something from either Benjamin Hall or Caleb Jackson? I think that's the biggest questions right now in the backfield, because there are some other guys that I think you like here. Maybe Jalen McGill, who we'll talk about here in a minute, ultimately becomes that guy. But I think when you look at the upside of these guys and you look at the guys that they were coming out of high school, I think Benjamin Hall and Caleb Jackson are probably the guys that had the most potential. Now it's about actually being able to unlock that. And you mentioned him as a receiver. I think that certainly is interesting as well. I think Damon June's probably going to handle a lot of that stuff for Carolina based off of what he was able to do last year. I thought there were some moments where he actually looked pretty good catching the ball out of the backfield. Now, the thing is that he did have He had a touchdown out of the backfield. I forget which game it was where he went about 80 yards on a screenplay. I think it was Syracuse. Where he had that big play. So that certainly factors in. So a lot of the other catches didn't result in many yards. But, I mean, that was everybody in Carolina's backfield a year ago. So can you find that guy that can maybe win a little bit more downfield as a running back? And by downfield, I mean, to end up with 5-6 yards on a reception as opposed to just 1 or 2 yards. I think that's going to be important too. Maybe Caleb Jackson is a guy that can lower his shoulder, finish some of those plays and pick up some yards for Carolina in some of those receiving situations there, but never had more than 6 receptions in a season so far in his career. So it would be a pretty significant jump for him there. So those are the guys that I think right now are the trio that are at the top of the running back room for Carolina. Then you get to the guy that I think is probably the wild card in the room, and that is Jalen McGill. It really just depends on how much he figures it out this year. Last year at 17 years old, having reclassified from the 2027 class or from the 2026 class, to the 2025 class to be a part of last year's roster. There were times where he just looked a little overmatched when he was out there on the field. Played 45 snaps, was a guy that found himself a role as that running back in the 5 wide receiver sets that was spread out as a receiver. One of the things that never made any sense to me was that they always spread him out as a receiver, never motioned him into the backfield and started using him to run the football in certain situations. Only had 7 carries for 19 yards last year. Going to have to be much more productive in that area in terms of yards per carry if he's going to be out there this season. But again, you wonder, especially in some of the situations that he came in, how effective was the offensive line? This year, if he runs behind the number 1 offensive line, would it be more effective for him? I really like some of the potential that he brings to the table. I think he was a guy that should have been, as a guy that should have been in high school a year ago. I think he's definitely someone that you feel like now is probably going to be much more situated this year and could be ready to battle those guys when they get to fall camp. I think he's probably the most intriguing guy on this roster right now, because when you look at the high school stats for him, over 4,000 yards rushing and 71 touchdowns at the high school level. He looks the part of someone that can be that explosive back for you, especially with what I saw on film from him in high school.
Yeah. Rasheed Wallace once said that ball don't lie. When you look at Jalen McGill, stats don't lie. I don't think last year was any sort of reflection of the type of player he's going to be at the college level. We just hope that we get to see that type of player in high school at Carolina. And that's a real hard thing in this modern climate to project moving forward. But it would not surprise me, and maybe you disagree with this, but if he were to emerge as RB3 by the end of the year and Benjamin Hall's kind of played his way out of the backfield, I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing for where this running back room is going to be at this year and where it's going to be moving forward. Because I think we could be talking about going into 2027, about those 3 guys, being a trio. And Jalen McGill having an even bigger role. So I'm with you. I thought there were times last year where it just didn't make a whole lot of sense why he was on the field at certain times. You could see the ability, though, as a pass catcher, something I just talked about there. 7 catches, 49 yards. That goes for 7 yards a pop. So that could be another way that maybe he gets onto the field when Carolina's maybe wanting to spread defenses out, get a running back matched up on a linebacker. But I did not come away last year discouraged about what Jalen McGill is and what he could be at the college level when you talk about the fact that, he was a reclassified senior playing college football last year. It's always harder, I think, on the football side of things to make that jump, make that impact as opposed to basketball. because basketball is not as physically demanding as it is as football is. I think you're talking about another year in the weight room, another year with the nutrition staff, getting acclimated to what Bill Belichick wants and expects. There's talent there, and I think you're going to see that emerge in ways that you didn't see last year. And like I said, if we get to the back third of the year, whether Carolina's competing for a bowl game or not, if he's that third running back in that running back room, I wouldn't be surprised at all and actually be encouraged about his future as a Carolina football player.
Yeah, and he's another guy that you talk about finishing a run strong. Tar Pit 9 sent this in, and this just saw this the other day. He's a national power lifter and is one of the strongest. I don't know about the strongest in America. We'll have to see. There are a lot of really strong running backs in the country, but I definitely think that's another thing that really stands out. And you're hoping is going to show up when he runs the football this year. The thing about him was last year, I mean, yeah, everybody's going to remember the drop that he had against Wake, which was a bad drop. You got to come up with that one. I know, Gio Lopez, it wasn't the greatest throw ever. It was a downfield throw with Gio, which those never really seemed to work out great a year ago. But at the same time, that's one that you feel like you got to come up with. If he's later in his career, I think he catches that ball. The other thing is that in terms of judging him as a receiver, let's see him be more of a traditional receiver out of the backfield. Let's see him line up where he's next to the quarterback and you run a screenplay and let's see what he can do with the football in his hands. Because I think that's when you'll start to see the type of receiver that he could be, the type of back that he can really be. And I think the explosion is there. It's just about, does it show up this year or does he need another year? That's going to be the thing, is that, again, he's still only going to be 18 years old. So he's still going to be very young. Is it just too much to ask for him at this age? But I think, with the year acclimating to the college level, he might be ready to contribute. And you're right. I think if he ends up being that guy that emerges as running back 3, and hell, I think there's a chance that he could be RB2. I don't think anything's guaranteed beyond Damon June in this backfield. I know, again, people really love Caleb Jackson, and I'm really loving what I'm hearing about him. But I don't think you can take anything off the table outside of Damon June being the number 1 running back for this team going into the season. And so if Jalen McGill becomes RB2 because he's just that explosive, I mean, this guy is senior year at the high school level at Mountain View Prep in Spartanburg, South Carolina, averaged 10.2 yards per carry. Prior to that, in his 2 years at Broome High School, just down the road in Spartanburg, he averaged 8.3 yards per carry. So this is someone that's been explosive his entire career. I mean, the touchdown numbers are ridiculous for 3 seasons. So that shows you that he is a guy that's a threat to take it to the house almost any time that he touches it. At least he was at the high school level. So does that show up? I think that's going to be really intriguing to see. Then behind him, this is where I think you get to a little bit of a drop-off. But there are 3 guys here that I think will be battling to take over that role as maybe that 5th running back, or that guy that if there are enough things that happen in front of them, if there are some injuries, something like that, maybe that this person does end up getting a chance to carry the football. It's junior Charleston French, who is a former walk-on for Carolina that sticks around on the roster, has stuck around here on the roster the last couple of years. JoJo Trope, who was a true freshman last year, he is going to be part of this roster again this year, decided to return to Carolina. And then Crew Davis, the true freshman out of Iona Preparatory School in New Rochelle, New York. I mean, when you look at this group, I think, to me, I'm really intrigued by what Crew Davis can bring. I know he was a 3-star, but this is a guy that had over 3,000 yards rushing at the high school level, over 1,000 yards receiving. So really, when you look at him, especially his senior year, did some things that reminded me of some of the better combo backs that we've seen Not going to say he's Christian McCaffrey or anything like that, but similar in terms of what he was able to do out of the backfield at a lower level at the in the state of New York. I do think this is a guy that people could be really surprised by this upcoming season, maybe having some sort of role in this Tar Heel offense.
Yeah, if I had to bet my money on one of those three guys emerging, I would look at Crew Davis being that guy. Just because you talk about the production, over 3,100 yards rushing, nearly 40 touchdowns. But then you're talking about his receiver, 119 catches, over 1,000 yards, 13 more scores. That just feels like a guy that Bobby Petrino could carve out a role for, right? With how creative he is as a play caller, how he is able to scheme guys and get the most out of a guy's talent. Crew Davis could be that guy where, no, he's not the most gifted running back coming out. You mentioned him just being a 3-star prospect, but this is a guy that's very sure of his ability and knows what he can do and know what he's capable of doing. And I do think this offense is going to be a little bit more creative, and I think it's going to be a little bit more dynamic in what it does and what it asks out of its personnel. So, we talked about those top 4 guys and really high on Damon June, obviously intrigued by what Caleb Jackson, Jalen McGill could potentially be for Carolina this year. When you look at the depth pieces, Crew Davis is the guy that I would maybe be the most intrigued by and the most excited to see. Is that a guy that emerges as the season does move along, as he gets acclimated to the college football, the way Belichick wants his guys to prepare? And so it'd be interesting to see just what that looks like. I always root for Charleston French just because that's just a badass name. I think it's just I always get excited whenever you see him or you hear his name get called on a broadcast. But when you're talking about production and stuff like that, it's easy to pick Crew Davis over him as a guy that could be a productive depth member of this running back room this year and for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think Crew is probably the guy that you look at the most and you think has the most ability. And what he does as a receiver, I think, is what really sticks out. And what I think, honestly, could get him in the conversation to make some sort of effect this year. You catch the ball the way that he catches the ball. I mean, he catches it like a receiver out of the backfield. Some of the stuff that he does, I believe he even lined up a decent amount as a wide receiver. They'd split him out. So if you want somebody in that 5 wide receiver role to be a running back that you can occasionally motion into the backfield, which I would believe that Bobby Petrino would take advantage of in certain situations, then that's your guy. I think that's the guy that can do it because his hands are as reliable as just about anybody's on the roster. At least we saw that at the high school level. We'll see how it ultimately translates to this level, but I definitely think that's somebody that you feel pretty good about. I mean, he was one of the guys that I looked at, and I do it every year when I look at these recruiting classes. I thought he was one of the more underrated players. He was one of those guys that, and part of it is the state that he comes from. In terms of playing lower classification in the state of New York, I don't even know if that's necessarily true. The state of New York, no matter what classification that you play in, it's not going to be viewed as high-level football. It's not going to be viewed like other states, like the state of Georgia, like even the state of North Carolina. State of New York, football is not seen as nearly as important. So you're not going to see these powerhouses that are going to produce all of these great players. The thing is that he didn't really have a chance to go to a lot of camps where he was able to stand out. And so I wonder if he's a guy that really just takes advantage of an opportunity if he gets it. I think like last year, you really can't rule out anybody in this running back room from making an effect because what are the known quantities? You've got Damon June based off of what we saw last year, and that's really pretty much it. So I'll be very intrigued to see what this running back room looks like this year, how many guys get an opportunity. I'm hoping it's not nearly as much of a rotating door as it was a year ago, because I do think that was part of the issue that Carolina had, was they could just never settle on a back, let somebody get into a rhythm as the season went along. And I think it really hurt them at times. Yes, the offensive line is going to have to be much better in front of them if they're going to succeed. But I think part of it is that they have got to figure out a rotation at this position and stick with it, especially out of the gate for Carolina, if they want to establish some sort of momentum in that game against TCU. I think the most important thing is going to be ride the hot hand. Whoever is most successful running the football for you, make sure you stick with that guy. Let that guy handle the majority of the carries. If it is a guy like Damon June, or if there are guys that are rotating in and are feeding well off of him, then let those guys get the carries that they need to in the game as well. It will be very interesting to see how Bobby Petrino and his staff ultimately play it. Make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Check out the article. I'll put it up after this edition. I did not put it up this morning. I meant to, and just it just completely slipped my mind. So I'll make sure to put that up for you guys. The rest of the time moving forward, we will have those articles up for you the morning before we end up doing the podcast later on that night. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye out for that. But yeah, HeelToughBlog.com for all of that. Also, catch up on the latest with Tar Heel recruiting. All you got to do is go to the football recruiting tab under the news, and you can catch up on all the latest that's going on there. The latest commitment is still Chad Willis, the wide receiver that flipped from Cincinnati out of the state of Michigan. So make sure you go back and read that. And there's plenty of other articles breaking down all of the different guys that Carolina has landed this offseason as a part of this 2027 class. Didn't start out great for Carolina on the recruiting trail in the 2027 class, but they have picked up steam. Don't worry, we are still going to be talking about it. I saw Greg Ward, one of our P1s that normally listens to the podcast, ask earlier, why are they not landing guys in the state of North Carolina? Don't worry, we'll be talking still all summer about that as to what a different approach this staff is taking to building this class than so many staffs before them, and whether or not that is ultimately the right decision. There will be other recruiting editions of the podcast sure to come here as we go throughout the offseason. But right now, the focus is on those position previews, is on getting you ready for this upcoming season, and we'll have all that over there at HeelToughBlog.com. Also over there, any news and notes around the Tar Heel basketball program as they continue to put together their roster for this season. Angelo Brizzi, the most recent addition. If you guys haven't read about him, make sure you guys go back and give us a read over there on the website about him so that you can learn more about the newest addition. One of the guys that I think is pretty underrated. A lot of the people in the YouTube comments of our last podcast absolutely roasted us for that. So we're going to make sure that we remember that if he ends up having a successful season. Make sure you guys go back and read just to be prepared for what Carolina could potentially be getting. And in terms of the podcast, make sure you head over to the YouTube page. We really encourage you to head over there and give us a subscription if you haven't already. Again, we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before we get to the start of the college football season, before Carolina takes the field for that game against TCU in Dublin. We really need your help. So if you could head over there, Heel Tough Blog, just search it in the search bar, and then you'll see our page. If you could give it a click and just give us a subscription, not only will it help us, but it'll help you guys. Whenever we have any of these live editions of the podcast, if you miss the announcements on social media, you guys will definitely be getting those notifications that'll be coming to you. So make sure that you do that. Other places that you can follow us on social media, at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter, at Heel Tough Blog on Facebook, and we do have the streams that are up there for you guys as well. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.